The median housing price in Canada is 4 times ours.
Going into 2025, it's only going to get worse.
Yep,
prices
we're in a bubble.
down to a
We are
reasonable
in an
level.
absolute calamity of a
$3
situation.
million for that?
It would take you 29 years to save up for a down payment.
Homeownership used to be considered a clear financial goal. Now, for many Canadians, especially millennials and young people, it feels more like a fading dream. Over the last 2 decades, house prices have risen far faster than wages, and in places such as Alberta, wages have actually remained stagnant or even declined. The result? A generation watching shelter costs race far ahead of wages and earning power. But this didn't happen overnight. It can be broken down into 4 stages of the Canadian housing crisis. If you understand these 4 stages, it'll give you better insight into maybe when you should buy, hold, or fortify your finances. In case you're new here, I'm Aaron, a 20-year corporate accountant and analyst. I've lived in Canada all my life, so I know a thing or two about the Canadian housing market. I've been through the ups and downs, and that's what I go into a lot in this channel. I basically talk about personal finance, investing, and investment portfolios, but I often touch on key insights into the housing market. So if this is of interest to you, consider subscribing to my channel. Now let's get right into it. Stage 1, foundation, where it all began. The first stage began quietly. After the 2008 global financial crisis, Canada entered a period of historically low interest rates. The intent was stability, keep borrowing cheap, spur recovery, and support home ownership. But those same low rates encouraged unsustainable levels of debt. Households borrowed heavily because credit felt inexpensive, even though wages didn't move enough to justify it. You could argue that the financial crisis began right here, because debt expanded faster than incomes. At the same time, cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary saw population expand rapidly. Immigration enriched the country economically, but housing supply nowhere kept up, not even close. Supply remained constrained while demand grew sharply. Governments leaned on easy wins, first-time buyer tax credits, land transfer rebates, and CMHC insurance adjustments, all aimed at boosting demand, not supply. Instead of building, we bid up existing homes. In Alberta, you could already feel the imbalance forming. The cost of living was climbing while wages stagnated, and when oil prices dipped, job growth slowed further. Developers struggled to justify new projects outside boom economies. The combination of cheap credit, slowing incomes, and policy that rewarded consumption created the foundation of a price acceleration that would spiral through the next decade. Early data points were flashing warnings. Household debt-to-income ratios climbed well above 150%, and by the late 2010s, they were second among major economies. Yet few noticed because real estate seemed safe, homes always appreciated, and interest rates felt stable. But beneath the surface, Canada was setting itself up for the second stage of this cycle, speculation. Stage 2, the acceleration, the speculation boom. From 2015 onward, the market shifted into full acceleration.
In recent years, people have started to look at homes and housing as assets only, places as investments, a speculative investment as opposed to a home and a place to live.
A mix of ultra-low interest rates, urban immigration, and financial optimism turned housing into a speculative asset. People just didn't buy homes to live in, they bought them to flip them or rent out later at a profit. This speculative way of thinking detached prices from real wage growth and productivity. For years, federal costs of mortgages hovered around zero, so the cost of carrying a mortgage wasn't that much. It was pretty minimal, so it wasn't really something to consider. Incomes didn't really have to rise to make housing more affordable, so you could qualify for a mortgage. Mortgage terms expanded, approval rules laxed, at least temporarily, and banks competed to be able to lend people money. This period saw aggressive bidding wars spread just beyond urban areas, and by 2019, even small towns were mirroring Toronto's price curves. And population surges just added fuel. Inward migration concentrated around the Greater Toronto Area, Lower Mainland BC, and Alberta cities. But governments failed to increase construction capacity meaningfully. Permitting backlogs, restrictive zoning, and building costs created barriers. In some provinces, developers faced year-long timelines between concept and completion. Every shortfall in not meeting demand meant that the pressure was put on existing stock, driving the prices upward. Regional differences magnified this imbalance. Ontario and BC experienced extreme price inflation due to speculative flows and foreign investment.
Extension on the existing ban on foreign buyers of Canadian housing. For years now, foreign money has been coming into Canada to buy up residential real estate. This has fueled worries about Canadians being priced out of housing markets.
Meanwhile, Alberta, hurt by weak oil prices and slowing energy investment, saw income stagnate or even decline as living costs crept up. Negative $1,555. People are actually losing money. And if we use an average inflationary rate of 2%, pretty much the bare minimum for inflation, the average median salary for someone living in Alberta should be $51,395. So they are being underpaid by roughly $12,400.
What kind of a show are you guys putting on here today?
It was the perfect disconnect between housing prices and the broader economy. Home prices doubled while the GDP per capita limped along. Housing starts fell short tens of thousands each year relative to population requirements. That scarcity meant renters couldn't escape rising costs, and first-time buyers were increasingly pushed aside by investors. Many Canadians bought during this cycle out of fear of missing out. It felt safer to overextend than to risk being permanently locked out. Yet those decisions came with financial rigidity, high leverage, minimal savings, and exposure to interest rate shifts. By 2020, household debts were rising again by 180% relative to disposable income. Construction remained insufficient, and wage growth lagged far behind inflation. However, optimism persisted because people felt, well, asset values, the homes keep rising in value, but what this did is just mask the frailty of the market. The key misunderstanding was that these low rates would last forever. And then the pandemic hit, injecting stimulus, disrupting supply chains, and transforming the home market almost overnight. If the first stage built the foundation and the second stage accelerated imbalance, the pandemic set the system on fire. In just months, low rates dropped even further. Savings surged from lockdowns, and people chased larger homes outside city cores.
The bank's actions were also unprecedented. We lowered the policy rate to the effective lower bound of 25 basis points and launched a range of liquidity facilities and purchase programs to keep markets functioning.
It was the final push before reality set in and affordability detached from reality. What followed was the tipping point. Stage 3. The affordability shock, the tipping point. From 2021 onward, home prices began to soar like never before. This left economists stunned, but what happened was, well, record low interest rates and pandemic stimulus. A lot of people were looking to get into the market. Canadians were sitting on savings from lockdowns, mortgage rates hovered around historic lows, and government subsidies were flowing through the economy. Buyers rushed into the market, pushing average home prices up more than 20% in a single year. But wages simply didn't keep up. They had barely moved while home prices continued to climb. By mid-2022, affordability hit its worst point in decades. The ratio of home prices to median income reached double digits in many cities. So even people with solid middle income level jobs were finding that they couldn't qualify for mortgages under stress tests. The dream of home ownership wasn't just being delayed, it was disappearing in real time. Hey, like I said, if you're new to my channel, I'm Aaron, a 20-year corporate accountant and analyst living in Western Canada. I talk about personal finance, investing, and investment portfolios. Subscribing to my channel won't make you rich or give you financial freedom. However, if you want practical, real, transparent, and I hope entertaining advice on these very subjects, consider subscribing to my channel. I've also created a membership which, in addition to some great perks, you'll have my sincere appreciation. I think it's worth checking out. When the Bank of Canada shifted interest rates upwards to combat inflation, this is where the real pain began. Monthly mortgage payments surged by hundreds, even thousands of dollars. People renewing 5-year terms found themselves staring at rates double or triple what they've locked in before. Affordability just didn't fall, it collapsed.
If you've got less income, but your rent's going up, and your food prices going up 3 times the pace of headline inflation, something's got to give.
Renters were caught in the squeeze too. As more people were priced out of ownership, rental demand exploded, pushing rent inflation into double digits in cities like Toronto and Calgary. In Alberta, something unusual happened though. While other provinces were seeing unaffordability rising due to runaway inflation, here the issue was stagnant wages. I actually made a great video on this very subject, stagnant wages and the growth, or lack thereof, in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I'll link that up above. Wages have effectively flatlined for nearly 10 years, especially in energy-related sectors. Resource production hadn't received the policy support needed to create new, well-paying jobs. So even though homes were cheaper than in Vancouver or Toronto, affordability kept eroding because income growth simply wasn't there. That's why in Alberta, many people spend the same level on their housing as in other provinces, even though home prices have risen higher in their provinces than in ours. I know a bit about this because I worked as a corporate accountant in oil and gas for a number of years, so I've seen my share of boom and bust. I kind of went through it all, you could say. It was tough. It sucked. What is happening is growing income inequality, establishing no more so much a middle class, but a two-tier system of the rich, very rich, and everyone else. And one of the things that I believe can get you out of this dilemma is through investing and managing your finances, and perhaps getting a side income and channeling all that money, extra money, besides just your job, into investing. That's why I started this channel. So if this sounds like something you'd be interested in, videos for the struggling middle class, consider subscribing to my channel. I've also just created a membership, which in addition to my sincere appreciation, you get a lot of great perks. I think it's worth checking out. Across the country, GDP per capita began to stagnate. In simple terms, the economy was growing mostly through population gains rather than productivity gains. More people were chasing the same limited stock of homes, while the cost of everything from groceries to fuel ate up what little disposable income people had left. For the first time in modern memory, many Canadians couldn't afford to stay in the homes they already owned, at least not without cutting back sharply everywhere else. This stage shattered the illusion that homes always appreciate safely. Many people that had stretched their budgets were now faced with the dilemma of their housing chewing up at least half of their income. And this is what really gets to me. Canadians, young Canadians who had never owned a home, were now priced out of the market. Hopefully not permanently. Canadians faced a dilemma where the math no longer worked, that your income wasn't matching the housing costs. And the next question that I'm sure is on everyone's mind is, have many Canadians been permanently locked out of the housing market, or will it eventually reshift and rebalance? Stage 4, the future shock. Correction or long-term capture? This next stage will determine where we go from here. Will the market eventually correct, or will it be permanently caught in a cycle of unaffordability? The solution relies primarily on 3 determining forces: interest rates, population inflows, and supply-side reforms. If interest rates fall while construction ramps up, there's a small window for a bit of correction. Prices could level off, incomes might gain ground, and debt ratios could stabilize. But that outcome requires consistent building and policies that strengthen wage productivity, something Canada hasn't achieved for over a decade. The other path is less optimistic. Rates plateau, migration continues at a record pace, and governments keep responding too late. In that case, housing budgets remain pretty much maxed out, and affordability never really returns.
We may be heading down the exact same path, but this time, it's not just speculation or overbuilding driving the crash, it's systemic affordability failure driven by bad government action and bad government policy.
So prices are still too high, prices need to come down, and we've just hit that affordability crunch that doesn't work anymore.
These are more structural changes. I mean, fundamentally, as a senior deputy governor has hammered many times, we need to get our productivity growth up. What's most concerning is that unless we change some other things, our standard of living as a country, Canadians, is going to be lower than it otherwise would have been.
To track which way we're heading, watch for signals. Has the federal government implemented widespread zoning reforms that enable fast construction? Are municipalities approving dense, transit-linked housing instead of endless single detached projects? Are wage gains linked to output rather than just inflation adjustments? This signals to you possibly where the foundation of affordability is going. In relation to people making wage adjustments just to battle inflation, such as your employer giving you a 2% raise, even if inflation is 5-6% that year, like I said, you're fighting a losing game. And they just won't properly admit it till people say something or till they've worked out all the kinks. But by that time, you're already behind, probably a number of years. So the 1, 2, 3% raise that you get every year, like honestly, that means nothing to me anymore. Like that isn't enough. And I know it's not. From a financial standpoint, this stage demands caution. Before buying, assess your stability. How secure is your job? How much liquidity have you built up? And whether your debt could handle another rate surprise. For many people, the smarter move is waiting or downsizing until their base finances are solid. A home should strengthen your financial resilience, not become the weight that breaks it. Alberta offers a small bright side of potential policy shifts. If the government went back to focusing on resource production, which we were once known for, but has not been supported over a few decades now, things could shift drastically for the better. But many things have to come into play, such as focusing again back on oil and gas and other things that Canada was once known for. Like I said, I worked in oil and gas for a number of years, and the boom and bust cycle is so much maybe like if you're in technology and you're going through the boom and bust cycle with big companies, as this shift is horrible. It's great when everybody's in the boom cycle and jobs are plentiful and wages are kind of going up, but when you hit that plateau or you're in the bust cycle and you've been there for a year or 2 or 3, it really cripples your finances. One mistake to avoid now is assuming that the past will repeat itself. The explosive appreciation of the 2010s, 20s was powered by a perfect storm: low rates, supply shortages, and unchecked demand. Those fundamentals are gone. The Canadian housing market is entering a maturity phase, not another boom cycle. If you align yourself with that proactive, practical planning, you're in a much better position than if you're waiting on, say, the housing market and some boom to happen again. You're in a better position to make smarter moves regardless of what the market does. In the end, all 4 stages reveal a pattern. When credit expands faster than income, affordability always erodes. When policy ignores productivity and focuses only on demand, prices surge beyond reach. Whether the next year brings correction or capture will depend not on speculation, but on how Canadians adapt their finances to this new reality. So, conclusion. What should Canadians do next? Understanding these 4 stages gives you kind of a framework on what you should do next, whether you should buy, hold, or restructure your finances. Housing isn't just an asset. It's part of the stability that existed for Canadians on their finances at one time. It changes the way you approach timing and affordability. If your job is stable, your finances are solid, it might make sense to buy a home for long-term security and you're not so worried about what the market does. However, if your income is tight, your job is somewhat uncertain, and your finances aren't the greatest, there's no harm in waiting and getting that in place first, and not just stretching your budget just to be able to say you got a home. In a high-cost environment, patience isn't lost opportunity. It's risk management. Over-leveraging today can cost far more tomorrow. Again, as a final closing thought, I've lived in Alberta all my life, and I've seen a lot of things, and I provide genuine things that I wish I knew 10, 20 years ago to people who are struggling in the middle class. That's what my channel is designed to do, to provide you additional insights into what is happening in housing, how I would start investing, how I would develop my investment portfolio. Practical, transparent insights that you can really use and adapt to maybe help you get out of a financial pit if you're in one, or maybe structure your finances better. So if nothing else, remember this: preparation beats prediction. You can't control what happens in the markets, if housing goes up or down, or predict it. Neither can I, but you can control your readiness for it. The next phase that happens in the Canadian housing market won't be about luck, it'll be about how prepared you are for it.